Hello, welcome. My name's Evan Rossio. I've been a Grand Rapids resident for about 27 years, living here with my wife Julie and kids Emily and Jordan. And today we're going to make a galette. Now I've been practicing law since about 1988, and when I'm not practicing law, I'm cooking. In fact, I've been doing some private chef stuff that came to a screeching halt when COVID happened, and looking forward to getting back into that once things loosen up and we get over the hump. In the meantime, today we're going to make a galette, which is kind of a poor man's pie. I've made these for years, and I found a technique that I borrowed from Jacques Pepin that seems to work really well. It's easy to learn how to do, it's easy to teach. The dough is very forgiving, and I think you're going to enjoy it. And you can make it with a lot of different types of fruits. So first what we're going to do is make the crust. It's technically a pâte brisée in French. It's a French short crust pastry that's used in tarts and pie crusts. I'm going to go through here, and we're going to make the crust in a food processor. You could also use a pastry cutter in a bowl and do it by hand, but this is much easier, even with the cleanup. So we're going to start with that, and we're going to take our flour, and you'll have the recipe at the end of this to write down or copy. We're going to take 120 grams of flour, or 1.5 cups. I like to measure things out by gram. It's just a lot more precise. If I asked for 10 people to give me 1.5 cups of flour, I'd get 10 different amounts. So we're going to put the flour and 1.5 sticks of butter, which is about 168 grams of cold butter. We want it to be cold. And we're going to cut that into 1.5 inch pieces. 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and we're going to process this in the food processor. Just pulse it for about 5 seconds. Now we're going to take ice water, about 1/3 cup of ice water. And then we're going to pulse that for another 5 seconds. And the idea is we want to keep the butter in small pieces, because what happens when the butter, you want it to be visible in the dough. When we roll it out, you want to see the pieces of butter in it. What happens with the cold butter in the dough, when it goes in the oven, it's going to start to melt, release steam, and that's what creates the layers and the flakes in the pastry. So now we're going to take the blade out. And we're going to turn it out on the workbench here and gather it together. And we want to work fairly quickly, because we don't want to spend too much time with our hands on it, because it will melt the butter and get warm and get harder to work with. If you get interrupted, or if it starts to get too warm, it never hurts to put it back in the refrigerator for a little bit. So we've got it in a disc shape here, and we're going to roll it out. But first we're going to put some flour all over our work surface here. Now, when I make these, when I made them in the past, before I used Jacques Pepin's recipe, I used to put the disc in the refrigerator and let it cool for at least a half an hour before rolling it out. This is a little bit easier. He calls for rolling it out right away. And I find, and then we put it in the refrigerator for 20 minutes after we roll it out. And it's just easier to work with this way. So we're going to continue to roll this. And it can be rough. It doesn't have to be perfect. That's what's nice about these galettes. But we want to get it a little bit thinner. And it's nice to not do this in the summer when it's really warm out. Sometimes it's good to use a cooler surface if you have one. Our quartz countertop is nice because it stays a little bit cooler. And I think we're just about where we want it to be. So at this point, we're going to gather up the dough and put it on a sheet pan here. I believe this is about 22 inches by 15 inches. And now we're going to stick this in the refrigerator. I did put it on parchment paper. Once we bake it, the parchment paper will keep it from sticking, and it makes cleanup a lot easier. So now we're going to take the crust and we're going to put it in the refrigerator for about 20 minutes and then prepare the filling. Okay, while we're waiting for the crust to cool for 20 minutes, and before we make the filling, I'm going to clean up my workspace here. The other thing you'll notice is all the trays of material and what we're going to need to use. What I've done is mise en place, which means everything in its place. So I like to make cooking and baking kind of as an experience, and the best way to do that is to be prepared and have everything prepped and ready to go before you start compiling your ingredients or baking or cooking or whatever you're doing, especially if you're doing stir frying because it happens so quickly. But what's nice is everything's ready to go, and I'll show you. We originally had the crust ingredients all put together. We have the filling ingredients put together. And then back on the bench there's some apricot preserves, which we're going to brush on top of it when it's done. But each step has its own tray with all the ingredients already laid out. Occasionally I'll get cocky, and I've made certain things so many times, I'll just go by memory, and it's never a good idea. It's always good to do a mise en place, whether you're new, especially when you're new, but even when you're experienced. I had one situation where I did not do my mise en place, and the last thing you want to do is wondering where's the cumin in the middle of making whatever you're making, or the time where I put the baked good in the oven, and about 10 minutes later I realized that I had forgot to put the vanilla bean paste in it, and by then it was too late. And had I had my ingredients out and done my mise en place, that wouldn't have been an issue. So it's very important to do that. The crust has just come out of the refrigerator after about 20 minutes, and we're going to make the filling with the pre-measured sugar, almond flour, and all-purpose flour. We're going to mix that up. I find that using a whisk is the easy way to do that and to get it mixed well. And now we're going to place that in the middle of the dough, and we're going to spread it around, leaving about a 2-inch border around the outside of the galette. This is actually a little secret that I did pick up from Jacques Pepin. Using the almond flour and the sugar on the bottom does a couple things. It prevents the bottom from getting soggy, which we don't want, and Adds a nice crunch. The texture of the almond flour is quite nice. So once that has been spread within 2 inches of the border, we're going to take our raspberries. And I use between 18 and about 24 grams of raspberries. Depending on the size, basically what you want to do is just mound them up here and see how many fit. I've had some smaller berries in the past where I've used a lot more. These are fairly large. The nice thing about this recipe, of course, is being able to use any fruit. Jacques Pepin used stone fruit, plums. I've made this with peaches. I've made it with apples, and generally use the same technique that I'm doing here. Just switched out the fruit, and it came out great every time. So this was about 24 ounces of raspberries, 4 of the small packages. And we're going to mound them up nicely. They are going to shrink a little bit when we bake them. So I mound them a little bit higher in the middle. And we just about have all of them, so I think I'll use them all. Now we're going to take the remaining sugar, and actually before we do that, we're going to dot the butter first on top of the fruit. I made really small pieces of butter. It's about 3 tablespoons. I don't necessarily use all of it. The raspberries, there's a lot of moisture in the berries, but this is, after all, a French recipe, and the French love their butter, and butter makes everything better. So we'll finish up with a couple pieces of butter here, and now we're going to add the remaining sugar and kind of sprinkle that right on top of the fruit, the berries. And now we're going to shake the galette, and we're going to fold up the sides here. If for some reason this is still too cold and it starts to crack, you can wait until it warms up a little bit, but I think we're just fine. And we're going to try to make a complete seal here to keep it from leaking. So we fold it over like so, and now we're going to put an egg wash on the outside. This makes it look nice, gives it a nice glaze. And then I'm going to sprinkle it with a coarse sugar. You can use Demerara sugar, which I have here, or turbinado sugar. You could use regular sugar if you don't want to make a special trip to the store. But I like this coarse sugar. Not only does it have a nice crunch and texture to it, but you can see it. It stays intact, and you can see it around the edge, and it just looks nice. And now we are ready to put it in the oven. It was preheated at 400. It's ready to go, and we're going to bake it for about an hour, and then pull it out and take a look and see what it looks like. All right, came out of the oven after about an hour, and I slid it onto this wire rack to continue cooling. You want this to come down to room temperature, so it's going to take a little while, and it'll start to firm up a little bit. But the smells in here are amazing. I wish we could send those through the video, but unfortunately you're going to have to make it and check them out for yourself. At this point, you could serve it as is. One of the things I like to do is to take a little bit of apricot jam without seeds, and you can heat it up in the microwave or in a pan briefly until it's spreadable, and you can add a little bit to the fruit itself. And you do want to do this while the fruit is still warm, and it adds a nice glaze to the fruit. You could also, if you so desire, and once again, totally optional, you can glaze the rim here as well, and it just makes it attractive. Doesn't add too much flavor, a little hint of the apricot, but if you want to use any other jam, if you don't have any apricot jam, I've used, raspberry jam, black raspberry jam. Generally, I don't do the outside because it'll stain it purple, but you could paint the fruit with that as well, or just serve it as is. But as people say, you eat with the eyes first, so the more attractive you can make it, even if it doesn't necessarily change the flavor too much, the better. So that is it. I'd love to see you give this a try. If you have any questions, we're going to put up the recipe here for you, and it has my email and my Instagram. erossio62@gmail is my email. @EvanRossio is my Instagram. I'd love to see you check out all of my food, so feel free to go over and follow me on my Instagram. If you have any questions at all, send me a message either on Instagram or shoot me an email, and you should really give it a try. I know a lot of people are afraid of baking, and pastry in particular, but with the popularity of shows like the Great British Baking Show, or the British Bake Off if you're over in the UK, people are starting to try new things in the kitchen, and this is, you get a lot of bang for your buck here. It's got a great pastry, French pastry taste to it, and as you saw, it's not that difficult. And don't let it scare you. Sometimes they leak a little bit. Mine did too. You just scrape it off and slide it onto the wire rack. No problem at all. And even if it doesn't look great, it sure as heck's going to taste good. So let me know if you have any questions, and looking forward to seeing you next time. Thanks.